There are 3 things about the psoas that you've probably never considered before, but can make a massive difference in your ability to release it and get long-term progress doing so. The first is that your psoas has a direct fascial connection to your diaphragm, meaning that they are intimately intertwined, and the position of one is going to affect the position of the other. Therefore, the position of your diaphragm and the ability to effectively use your diaphragm is going to have a direct influence on how your psoas feels and the position that it's in. Let me give you an example. Almost everyone has some degree of this lower rib flare right here, and what that's indicative of is a diaphragm that can't fully move into an exhaled position. So when we breathe in, the diaphragm is going to descend, and when we exhale, the diaphragm is going to ascend and move back into that domed position. But these lower ribs being flared down here represent a diaphragm that can't fully move into that ascended position, and the ribs aren't going to fully come down. These ribs are stuck in an inhaled state, so to speak. So if that's true, then that is going to directly put tension on your psoas. If that's the case and your ribs stay stuck flared, do you notice what that did to my pelvis? It is going to bring it forward, and that's going to put a lot of tension on the psoas, and it's going to keep it in a position where you are stuck in anterior pelvic tilt. So this is going to inherently create a situation where your psoas feels tight because it is. It's being pulled because of the position of the diaphragm. If we could learn to fully exhale, get those ribs to come down, that would help our pelvis get underneath us, that would help inhibit the psoas. And here's an exercise I really like for that. We're gonna get in this seated position, obviously, but we have a step underneath Trevor because that's what's allowing him to keep his whole foot flat, but still get around a 90-degree bend at both his knees and his hips. So if your chair allows you to do that, great, stick with it. But regardless, you need to be able to feel your sit bones on both sides throughout the duration of this exercise. So those little bony protrusions in each butt cheek, make sure you're feeling relatively even contact with those while you go through this. We're gonna take that pillow, fold it in half so it's about that thick, which is what you want, and we're gonna wedge it in between our lowest ribs and the top of our thighs right there. And now what we're gonna do is take our arms over them, and we're going to get in this position where we have a bent elbow, palms facing us, and now we're gonna reach and protract forward. So we are going to bend forward a little bit, and that's okay because the goal of this exercise is to open up our backs. So holding that position right there, keeping your whole foot flat on both sides, feeling your sit bones a bit, we're going to exhale through our mouth. Nice and soft and long. And at the end of that exhale, sighing it out, we're gonna feel a little bit of side abs engage. And you're gonna slightly maintain that. The pillow is there to help you do that. And then softly and silently inhale through your nose for about 5 seconds, 3 to 5 seconds, depending on how comfortable you can be. And then exhale again. Keep working through that for about 5 breaths. Some things to keep in mind here is that we want our head to be in a neutral position. So it shouldn't be shoved far forward or retruded back. We want it to be that we're looking somewhat in between our hands, straight ahead right there. And that will ensure we're in a pretty good neck position. And the other thing is that people, despite this being a flexion-based exercise, will want to sit up when they inhale. That's you trying to breathe into your belly and extend. So we're trying to get your back to relax. We're trying to open up your ribs in the back. So maintain that posture right there. It's actually a little bit better to be a little bit more slouched than extended. We can do other drills to open up your front ribs, but the purpose of this is to open up your back ribs. A couple of modifications if necessary. If that amount of flexion and rounding is uncomfortable for you for some reason, you can add a little step, whatever works for you, maybe some books, I don't know, find something in your house that works well, and then stack it underneath that pillow right there. And now you can still get a little bit of that protraction, feel your sit bones, do everything the same. For other people, they may not feel enough posterior expansion without getting a little bit more flexion added in. So what you could do there is simply just keep your elbows in the same place, but reach them further and push your ribs back more, go into more flexion. And for other people, that will be what they need to get that expansion of their back and relaxation of those back extensor muscles. The most common mistake on this exercise is people are gonna overdo the reach and really force it because they really wanna expand their back. But really, that's gonna cause more problems than anything else. You're just gonna compress yourself more. So 3 out of 10 intensity of a gentle, soft reach right there. And you can maintain that as you inhale. That's all you need to get the expansion we're looking for. The second thing is your feet are going to have a direct causative effect on the position of your psoas, meaning that how you hold your body weight and your center of mass over your foot is going to have a direct impact. Let me show you what I mean. As I've mentioned in several other videos, posture is just a representation of how you're managing your center of gravity. There are other factors that go into it, obviously, but this is a huge one. So if I have a pelvis that is, let's go back to that first example, in an anterior pelvic tilt, that is obviously pushing more weight onto my forefoot. But is it the pelvis's fault or the fact that your center of mass is just generally speaking more forward on your forefoot? If you just stand up normally and lean forward, that is going to flare your rib cage. That is going to facilitate you being in a position of extension, and that is going to put your psoas in a position of tightness as well. So if we can't get our center of mass to shift back onto our rear foot, then we're going to constantly have a reason to be forward and flared and tight within our psoas because we haven't learned how to bring our spine curves into this position where we're stacked our rib cage over our pelvis instead of being flared or even too far back here, being stacked. And feeling our heels is going to be very important. And I'm a huge fan of exercises that get us to stack better with more of a heel reference because that's going to allow us to address the root cause of this issue. So hopefully by now you're starting to see that, oh yeah, all this stuff really is so interconnected within the body. I can't just necessarily see one muscle that's tight and think that that muscle is tight in isolation and I have to just address that thing. It's not necessarily the case. That's not how the body works. So if you want a more comprehensive approach and something that is going to really help dial in the ability to stack our spine curves, improve our center of mass, restore motion, and also improve posture, check out my beginner body restoration program. I'll link it down below. The third thing is that your psoas somewhat uniquely has this ability to get our pelvis to move into this anteriorly oriented position and hold it there, but also pull your femur out into external rotation. Normally, when we go into more of this anterior pelvic tilt position, that's going to bias our femurs towards internal rotation. But if I have a psoas that's quite tight, especially down here, that's going to pull my femurs out into external rotation. So in totality, what we have is a diaphragm that is stuck in a position where it's inhaled and you can't fully exhale. You have a center of mass that's forward and these hips that are turned out into external rotation. So the ultimate way to address this tight psoas would be a couple of things. Get the full exhale, get the pelvis underneath us, and be able to get these femurs to internally rotate better. Here's one of my favorite exercises for that. What we're gonna do is get our feet on the wall. And ideally for most people, they're gonna have a shelf underneath them of some sort. So you could use something like this DC block, you could use a bench, you could use whatever you need to stack up as long as you can still maintain your whole foot flat on the wall. That's gonna be the important part there because we need foot contacts on the wall. Those foot contacts are the inner heel and the first metatarsal head on both sides evenly. That doesn't mean we lose the outside foot, that just means that's where our bias is. Now, we're also gonna have an object in between our knees. And this object needs to be a little bit compressible, so that way when we squeeze it, our knees very slightly move in. But we also don't want the object to be so large that in the starting position, our knees are outside of our hips, so they're wide like that. It should be, we're starting pretty in line with our feet and our hips. And now what we're gonna do, keeping our hands on our low ribs and our chin directly at the ceiling, we're going to do a little posterior pelvic tilt. And we're gonna do that by dragging our feet down into that shelf or down on that wall, but they're not obviously going to move. It's the intention of dragging our heels down, which is going to lift our tailbone off of the floor. And as we do that, we're going to feel our hamstrings engage on both sides relatively evenly. Our low back remains flat. So that's all we're feeling right now is hamstrings. After you have that, you're going to squeeze the ball. And for this, you're gonna squeeze it a decent bit. On a scale of 1 to 10, you're looking at about somewhere between a 5 to 7 out of 10. Not to the point where you're shaking or you're sweating, just enough to kind of feel your inner thigh muscles working on both sides. So make sure you don't lose your hamstrings when you get that squeeze. And then you're just going to inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth, softly sigh all the air out. You're going to be very tempted to tense other things up in your body as you do this, such as your neck, such as your calves, such as your abs, but you want to make sure that nothing is engaging other than your hamstrings and your inner thigh muscles. The only exception to that could be a little bit of your side abs at the end of the exhale. But as long as you're isolating those muscles, you're doing a really good job. The most common mistake on this is people are going to lift their hips too high in the air, and that is not what we want. We want the tailbone to be slightly lifted off of the floor, but not the low back. So it's important that you just do a little bit of a tilt and then engage with the squeeze. Depending on you as an individual, you may want to add a little support underneath your neck, like a towel rolled up. Just make sure that it's only as thick to the point where you feel like your neck is supported and your chin is passively pointing straight up at the ceiling. You don't ever want to do this where it's so thick and it's tilted back or it's collapsing down. As a last resort, if you don't have a wall and a shelf you can put up against that wall, you could just put your feet on a bench or a chair, something stable, and drag down into that. It's not the most ideal thing ever, but it will certainly be better than nothing. Just make sure when you are doing this, it's just pretty much your heels digging down, maybe a little bit of your shin. You don't want the bench so close to where you're here. It's gonna make it harder for you to find your hamstrings and tuck genuinely. Now this is going to make a pretty good impact for many people initially, but the question is it sticking? There are many factors in our lifestyle and even the shoes we wear which can create this environment where our center of mass is going to continue to be pulled or pushed forward. But if we sit all day long, then of course that is going to override what we're doing with a little bit of these exercises, and we would need to do them more frequently to see longer term success. The other thing is that people could be wearing very poor shoe wear. That is not what they need, and it's going to facilitate them being stuck in that forward, anteriorly oriented state because they can't get their center of mass back relatively on their heels. So I have a video on shoe wear, and I'm not affiliated with these brands whatsoever. I just really genuinely believe in the power that a good shoe can have on improving center of mass. So you can check that down below in the description.